Hello, this is Cousin Vinny Agnello, the critically acclaimed author of The Devil's Glove, and no, I don't normally dress like this. Tonight I'm dressed as the protagonist of my critically acclaimed national favorite book, The Devil's Glove. I'm Billy Green tonight because I think we're going to be introduced to him in a big way. So far, we've been getting pretty far in this series. We're going to try to get about 180 pages done before I'm done, and we're going to do it in many different segments, 15 minutes at a time. And at the end of this adventure, hopefully you will believe what everybody in the country seems to believe, that this is an absolute classic of a morality tale, and I hope you love it as much as the rest of the country seems to. So today we'll get started. This is the Devil's Glove. Anyway, this is called the Bedtime with Cousin Vinny series, and it's exclusively on YouTube. And tonight I'll read for you. Thank you. I left you off when they discovered the Devil's Glove on page 58. And Mr. Romano, here we start with Mr. Romano and Eddie. Mr. Romano stepped away from the hole, and Eddie knelt down by the green object. As he touched it, he immediately recognized the leather texture. Instantaneously, he dug it out with his hands. He looked it over in amazement. "Dad, it's some kind of fancy baseball glove. You should see it. It's really cool. It has all kinds of fancy artwork on it." "Well, bring it up and let me take a look at it." Mr. Romano reached his hand down in the hole, and Eddie grasped onto it. Mr. Romano proceeded to pull Eddie up and out of the ditch. "Let me take a look at that," Mr. Romano demanded while taking the green infielder's glove from Eddie. "Wow, Eddie, this glove's ancient. We're talking the 40s here, maybe even earlier. And look at all the intricate artwork done on it. This had to be somebody's pride and joy. I wonder how it got buried like that. It must have been a practical joke that got played on somebody. You know, this is an infielder's glove, Eddie. You have no idea how rare this glove is. It's for a southpaw like you. I don't know if you know it, but traditionally most southpaws don't play the infield." "I don't care what kind of glove it is, Dad. Just give it back," Eddie demanded. "Well, that's a nice attitude, son. Here, take your glove." Mr. Romano threw the glove over toward Eddie, who caught it and held it tightly. "I think it's time to get out of here, Eddie," Mr. Romano notified, obviously annoyed with Eddie's bad attitude. "I like this glove. It's a pro glove, and I'm going to use it from now on," Eddie announced while wrapping both his arms around it. "It's your glove, Eddie. Do what you want with it." "That's right, Dad. At least we got that straight. It is my glove, and from now on, nobody is touching it. You hear me?" "Calm down, son. Nobody wants to touch your glove." "Gee, what in hell's gotten into you, kid? We were having such a nice day, and now you gotta go and catch an attitude and spoil it all." Eddie didn't respond, but followed his father out of the wrecking site. Next chapter. It's called The True Meaning of Hell. He didn't know what day or year it was. He had no concept of time. His only quote-unquote friend, speaking in the loosest of terms, stood in the shadows in a baseball dugout. He was not allowed full access to that dugout either, and it annoyed him that he could only go as far as the stairwell that led there. He was utterly confused. He looked up at the perpetually overcast sky, and it was a constant reminder of how dismal and dreary his existence had become. He had nothing to do, and all the time in the world to think and obsess about it. There was nobody to talk to. He was, for the most part, doing a life sentence in solitary confinement. The ballpark that he now called home was one he was not familiar with. He was sure that he'd never played at this place before. He spent a lot of time examining and re-examining his whereabouts, trying to figure out what city it belonged in. It was nothing like Comiskey Park, and that was the last place he remembered being at. He really missed Michael and wanted more than anything to dream about him and the good times they shared. But when he slept, he had a recurring nightmare. The only dreams he seemed capable of having were ones that repeated the events of the worst night of his life. And because of this, he tried not to sleep at all. Sometimes he was unable to accomplish this seemingly monumental feat, and he ended up reliving his only night in the major leagues. He heard the fans heckling him over and over again after each fielding error. He saw that jerk in the stands angrily telling him that he'd be better off dead. He ducked when those kids threw apples at him and verbally abused him, ranting about how their throwing accuracy was better than his. He remembered how his teammates refused to look at him, which made him feel even more like an outcast. Tears welled in the corners of his eyes as he sat by himself, shaking his head sadly and praying to God to make this nightmare go away. The monotonous silence was suddenly broken as the manager stepped out of the dugout and declared, "We're going to have company." The sound of his voice jerked him back to reality, and with a blank stare he tried to comprehend the words the manager had just uttered. He gathered himself and looked over at the distinguished-looking man in black and replied in surprise, "Visitors? No, visitor. Some kid has your glove. I think he needs some coaching. I think you're the man for the job. We're going to give him the same deal I gave you. But let's see to it that he doesn't renege, okay? Don't let me down. This kid is your ticket home. Do you understand me?" "Yeah, loud and clear. I'll do whatever's necessary to get back home. You promise I'm going to get there, right?" "Oh yeah, you'll get there." End of chapter. Next chapter, Eddie's addiction. At home, the unique green painted baseball glove became the major topic of conversation as the Romanos gathered at the dining room table for their evening meal. "Eddie, take that dirty glove off your mother's table," Mr. Romano ordered. Eddie took his glove off of the table as instructed and rested it upon his lap. It was evident that he was paying more attention to the glove than the dinner being held around him. Mrs. Romano had spent hours cooking her son's favorite meal, spaghetti and meatballs. She had labored over the meat sauce, an old family recipe that always put a smile on Eddie's face. She found it quite odd that all her time spent and effort seemed to have been wasted upon a unusually uninterested 11-year-old. She stared at him disconcerted and tried her best to be Dr. Mom. "Eddie, are you feeling okay?" "Yeah, Mom," Eddie responded apathetically as he picked at the meal in front of him. "Eddie, is the sauce okay?" she asked with concern. "Don't bother with him. He's been like this ever since he found that stupid glove," Mr. Romano explained, wearing a large frown of frustration. Didn't the two of you have a nice day together?" Mrs. Romano inquired in astonishment. "The day went fine, Lucy. I don't know. Maybe the kid is going through a phase, but to be honest with you, I've never seen anything quite like it. He was an absolute delight. Clever, witty, and totally charming until he found that ugly glove." "Mom, can I be excused?" Eddie asked, feigning being unperturbed and making light of his dad's growing anxiety. "But Eddie, you hardly even touched your meal." "I think I just lost my appetite." "Listen, Ed, if you're not going to eat after your mother slaved all day long to make you this good supper, then you better not even think about coming down here later on to munch out. I'll put a freaking padlock on that refrigerator. I'm not kidding you, kid. You're really starting to piss me off," Mr. Romano said exasperatedly. "I'm not hungry. May I be excused?" Eddie asked flippantly. "Go! Get out of here!" Mr. Romano snapped impatiently. Eddie got up from the table and ran upstairs to his bedroom, carrying his special glove and cassettes. Mr. Romano shook his head at his wife in disapproval and then continued to eat. "He seems mighty attached to that baseball glove. Where'd you find it?" Mrs. Romano queried. "You'd never believe it if I told you," Mr. Romano announced calmly, feeling the weight of the world being lifted off his shoulders since Eddie was no longer in sight. "Try me. You're probably not going to like this, but we went scavenging through the debris at the old Comiskey Park, and we found it there." "Vince, are you crazy? Don't you know that demolition sites are dangerous?" "Well, of course I know that. Look, the kid had his mind set on going. And you know how willful he is when he has his mind set on something. So I brought him. Shoot me." "Well, at least the two of you are okay. Let's put it this way. I'm okay. I'm not too sure about the kid. He's probably just tired and cranky. I wouldn't worry too much about it. He's had a long day." "Yeah, you're probably right. I'll say one thing, though. That glove looks to be in pretty good shape. That's a nice find," Mrs. Romano marveled. "It surprised the shit out of me. You know, that's an old glove. It had been around for at least 40 to 50 years. It's just amazing that it isn't deteriorated. They must have treated the leather with something special. Or maybe it wasn't in the ground as long as you think," Mrs. Romano hypothesized. "Possibly, but the kid found it buried in a hole that was dug out by an earth-moving machine," Mr. Romano pointed out. Mrs. Romano gave him a puzzled look. They both finished their evening meal in peace. New chapter. A look into the past. Eddie sat on his bed listening to the cassette tapes his father had bought for him at the memorabilia show. He looked over at the posters of the Major League ball players he had pinned to his bedroom walls. He kept making mental comparisons between his antique glove and the gloves his heroes wore. He didn't understand why he was so attracted to his new glove. He just knew he was. Ever since he found the glove, it had a hold on him. The same kind of effect that a narcotic has on an addict. Not to say that Eddie knew anything about narcotics, since he certainly didn't, but like a drug, the glove became a source of security for him. He listened to the recording of Babe Ruth talking baseball for the third time. The more he listened to it, the more he found that he had a natural affinity toward baseball's greatest legend. He also enjoyed the calming effect that Ruth's earthy type voice had on him. He got up off the bed and grabbed a copy of the baseball encyclopedia off his shelf. He handled the book with tender, loving care, since it was a gift from his father. He looked up Babe Ruth and examined his lifetime statistics. He marveled at his .342 career batting average and the 2 seasons in which he hit 59 and 60 home runs. He stared over at the poster of Cecil Fielder on his wall. and knew that he would never look at it in quite the same way again. To Eddie, Fielder's 51 home runs and 277 batting average in 1990 was a joke when compared to Ruth's 59 home runs and 378 batting average in 1921. He concluded that the baseball legends of the past were obviously of higher quality than the legends of the game today. He examined his new glove and smiled at it in adoration. Since finding it, he had never been so happy. His glove was from the past, and now, after close examination of the facts, his heroes would be too. The phone rang abruptly, disturbing the moment's peace.